The Istari, the Five Wizards, are the source of many mysteries, in particular the Blue Wizards who vanished into the east and whose deeds are the source of much speculation. But what a lot of people don't realise is that they were not the only wizards to have vanished. Radagast the Brown also disappears from the story without a trace. So where did he go? Or, ominously, what happened to him? I don't blame you if you're a little confused right now. Radagast, what's the mystery there? After all, everyone is a little dismissive of him, or in Saruman's case, very dismissive, calling him both a simple and a fool. While Gandalf, Saruman, and seemingly the Blue Wizards all made major moves, Radagast was simply enamored with birds and beasts, and most writings indicate him being the least powerful and influential of the wizards. He could be helpful at times, but ultimately he has very little to do with elves and men and the great events of the Third Age, and he travels very little, mostly staying at home. Like Saruman, he fails in his task to aid the Free Peoples, but in a much more harmless way. That being said, Radagast does play a brief but important role in the story due to his associations with both Gandalf and Saruman. Saruman deceives Radagast and uses the birds Radagast provides as spies to search for the One Ring. And when Saruman is ready to make his move and openly declare with Sauron, he convinces Radagast to find Gandalf and send him to Isengard. Radagast finds Gandalf along the road somewhere south of the Shire and convinces Gandalf to go to Saruman after telling him that the Nazgul had been spotted abroad. Radagast then informs him that he's returning home and rides away. This is the only time Radagast physically appears in the story. Well, technically it's not a physical appearance because it's actually just Gandalf retelling the story of his captivity at the Council of Elrond. Gandalf then goes to Isengard and gets captured by Saruman. However, Radagast redeems his mistake. Before he and Gandalf parted ways, Gandalf tells him to gather his birds and beasts, and if any of them have any news relevant to the Nazgul, to go straight to Isengard. Radagast is true to his word, and sure enough, news comes to Isengard, in the form of Gwaihir the Windlord. Gwaihir comes to the quick understanding that Gandalf is not chilling atop Orthanc by choice, and he carries him to safety. After this, Radagast does not appear again. By itself, it isn't that unusual. Like I said earlier, Radagast has few dealings with elves and men, and mostly just chills at home. But it becomes a bit of a mystery because despite not appearing again, this isn't the last time Radagast is mentioned. 2 months later, elven scouts return to Rivendell bearing news about the surrounding lands. Some of these had crossed the mountains and entered Mirkwood, while others had climbed the pass at the source of the Gladden River and had come down into Wilderland and over the Gladden Fields, and so at length had reached the old home of Radagast at Rhosgobel. Radagast was not there, and they had returned over the high pass that was called the Redhorn Gate. So the plot thickens. Radagast had evidently made it back to his home, otherwise why would Gwaihir have went to Isengard? If you're wondering about the timeline, Radagast and Gandalf meet at the end of June 3018. Gandalf is imprisoned on the 10th of July and isn't rescued until the 18th of September, so presumably Radagast gets home around early to mid-September at the latest. Elrond's scouts probably get to Rhosgobel around November, so Radagast should be there. After all, Radagast rarely travels and was keen to get back home. Where else would he be? Before I get out of control with this one, I want to point out some things. Firstly, it's possible Radagast was simply away at the time when the scouts arrived at Rhosgobel. He might have been nearby, and they missed each other by a few hours or even days. But then, these are elven scouts. They would probably have a fairly good idea of whether a place had been recently inhabited. But there's another clue in the wording. Rhosgobel is described as Radagast's old home, meaning he might have been living somewhere else at the time. But in that case, why would the scouts even go there? It's also possible that by Radagast's old home, Tolkien meant that Rhosgobel is simply an old home. That's English for you. So there might not really be a mystery here. Radagast could have simply been running errands and wasn't home when his visitors arrived, or that he didn't even live in the place that the elves went to anymore. Or it could be ominous. There's a theory that while Radagast had been useful to Saruman, Saruman decided to tie up loose ends and have Radagast killed. Saruman may have deduced that Radagast was unwittingly behind Gandalf's rescue and decided to enact some revenge. The timeline does match up. Gandalf was rescued on the 18th of September, giving Saruman's servants around 2 months or so to get to Rhosgobel and kill the unsuspecting brown wizard. The fact that Radagast is not mentioned, or even heard from again after this, does lend credence to the idea that he was killed and dumped in a ditch somewhere, and nobody knew better. But before you get worried, because I know Radagast comes across as a pretty chill guy, there's absolutely no hard evidence that he was killed. Like I mentioned earlier, there's several explanations as to why he wasn't found at Rhosgobel, and the fact that he isn't heard of or mentioned again afterwards shouldn't be that surprising. The guy is a recluse. Him vanishing and being hard to find is true to character. In fact, I'd say there's a greater chance of us hearing about him if he was killed. Saruman might have let it slip, and remember, Radagast has a lot of animal friends. If they witnessed his death, you'd think they would go and tell somebody. And drafts from the history of Middle-earth, while not canon, do give us a glimpse into the mind of Tolkien. When Tolkien reached the Mines of Moria chapter when initially writing The Lord of the Rings, he made some notes about where the story would go afterwards. One of these notes suggests that after the War of the Ring, Saruman would be evicted from Isengard and it would be handed over to Radagast. Why did Tolkien change this? Well, keep in mind, he hadn't even truly conceptualized the Ents at this point. So even though Tolkien would make massive changes, at that point at least, he had not decided that Radagast should be killed. Ultimately, it's all speculation. All we know is that after sending Gwaihir here to Orthanc, Radagast vanishes for the rest of the War of the Ring and beyond. Well, at least to the knowledge of the relevant characters. While there's a possibility he was killed, there's no actual evidence for it. And it's equally, if not more likely, that he was still kicking around somewhere at the beginning of the Fourth Age and beyond. As for his ultimate fate, well, there's 2 lines from a poem in the Unfinished Tales that tells us exactly what happened. Of the 5 that came from a far country, only 1 returned, others never again. So, whether dead or alive, Radagast stayed in Middle-earth and would not return to Valinor. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. I know it's not the most mysterious of mysteries, but it's something that I wanted to bring attention to nevertheless. Fans get so caught up with the blue wizards that they don't even realise that Radagast just vanishes as well. Yes, while the possibilities with his fate are much more limited, I still think people should be aware. Anyway, cheers, farewell, and remember, if you're going for a wizard colour, don't go for brown, go for something like pastel pink.